My name is Jeffrey Madica. I am a writer who has 6 novels up on Amazon, and I am currently writing a 7th novel, which is titled A Long, Slow Aftermath. This is the story of Preston, a man from the punk scene, a drug addict, and an alcoholic who is trying to get his life together after having left a drug rehabilitation facility. This is a work of literary fiction, as are all my novels. And this story has a significant supporting character named Toshi. Toshi is blind. She is a native Californian. She is the girlfriend of another supporting character named Thea. She uses a white cane to get around, and she's not completely blind. She can see blobs and shadows, but she is definitely functionally blind. In the work, I do not identify the reasons why she is blind, nor do I say if she has been blind for her whole life, though that is implied in the story, if not said outright. I have created this questionnaire to give me a better idea about how to write for the character Toshi as a blind person, to give me a better perspective on how to write for a blind character. There are many facets of her personality that I have already developed, and I have done some research online, but I could use some more insight, especially from a personal perspective, directly from people who are not sighted. So there are 7 questions. And the first question is, are there any stereotypes about blind people that bother you? Any general misconceptions that really irk you or annoy you? I originally wanted to ask, what do you think of fictional representations of blind people in fiction? But there are not a whole lot of blind people in fiction. When I tried to think of blind characters in fiction, the first 2 that came to mind were Daredevil from the comics and Geordi LaForge from Star Trek The Next Generation. Of course, these are blind people who, they're kind of like cheating because Daredevil has super senses that make up for his being blind, and Geordi LaForge has a super advanced prosthetic that makes him able to see even better than people who aren't blind. So they're blind people, but they kind of cheat with their superpowers and their super technology. The only other examples I could think of were bit characters and supporting characters from other shows and movies. For example, the movie Contact, there is a bit character who only has a couple lines, who is a blind person who works, who was a blind astronomer. I believe he was an astronomer. He was in the movie very much. But yeah, there are very few representations of blind people in fiction, it seems to me. But I do want to fight back against any stereotypes and misconceptions that people have about blind people. Question number 2. Are there any facets of being blind that you would like to be emphasized in a blind character, especially a character who has a major role in the story? Toshi basically comes from a privileged background. She grew up in an upper middle class family, nice house in the hills, never wanted for anything, which is the opposite of Preston. He comes from a very poor background. He's really into the punk scene. He's really into the underground art scene. And he befriends Toshi, and Toshi starts to find out about the urban underground, basically cultures and worlds that she hasn't had very much contact with. And that's the basis of their friendship. And that's how she works into the story. She's looking at things from a mainstream perspective and discovering things that are basically new to her. I mean, not unknown to her, but things that she hasn't experienced before. So that's how she works in the story. And question number 3, do you have a seeing eye dog or do you use a cane? If you do not have a seeing eye dog, have you ever thought about getting one? Why or why not? Now, I did some research on this, cane or dog. It seems to me that one of the issues about getting a seeing eye dog is cost. I know that these are highly trained animals, and someone told me that they're worth a lot of money. I've only known one blind person who had a seeing eye dog. But yeah, I would like some personal feedback about that. if that's something you could talk about or let me know about. Question number 4. In this novel, Toshi attends her first ever punk show. And punk shows, sometimes it's just a bunch of people standing around watching a band, and sometimes they can get kind of wild or really wild with a lot of drunk, stoned, or otherwise inebriated people, obnoxious people. Do you go to musical events? What kind of musical events have you been to? And what was your experience with it, given that it's different from most other situations? I imagine some musical events can be fairly formal and tame, but others, like, have you ever been to a rock show? Have you ever been to a hip hop show? Have you ever been to a punk show where there might be a pit and drunk people? Or you might be in a really dark club where even sighted people can't see very well. So you might get run into, you might have obnoxious people slam into you or accost you, not realizing that you are blind. What are your experiences with that, with going to shows? And if you've been to a wild rock and roll show, I'd like to know what it was like for you. Question number 5. When people choose romantic partners, looks play an important role. Probably more important than most sighted people are willing to admit. And how do you evaluate and choose potential partners, given that you cannot directly evaluate their looks? Now, imagine looks and culture somehow come through, even though you can't see them. I have done a little online research about this, but I'd like your personal perspective. If it's too personal a question, feel free to skip it. You don't have to answer any of these questions if you don't want to. You can answer just some of them. But I would like some personal feedback about this. Yeah, so that's just another question I have. Even though Toshi already has a partner, and there are reasons why she's going out with this woman. And yeah, I'd just like some personal feedback about that subject. Question number 6. In this work, Toshi contemplates getting a tattoo. After her exposure to the punk scene, after talking to a lot of musicians and to Preston and a lot of her friends, she actually thinks about getting one. This is an idea that just formulated later on as I was working on the story. I thought, wow, what about Toshi getting a tattoo? So my question is, do you have any tattoos? If you do, how did you go about choosing a designer or an artist? If you do not have any tattoos, would you ever consider getting one? And if you were going to get one, how would you go about it? Like I said, this is a concept I hadn't even remotely imagined. But as Toshi was getting more and more into these new realms she was exploring, she talks to Preston about his tattoos and especially about his love interest tattoo. She has tons of tattoos, and he describes them to her in detail. Very big part of the story. And it suddenly pops in her head that she wants one. And I have a little narrative about how she's going to go about it, but I'd like to get your feedback on that idea. And if you have a tattoo, please tell me how you went about getting it. Question number 7 is simply, is there anything else you would like to add? Is there anything that I did not touch upon? Any comments or suggestions? And also, is there anything about Toshi's backstory that you would like me to add? Like I said, I do not explain why she's blind. I don't say if she's been blind her whole life, but it's pretty much implied. I mentioned that she comes from a privileged background, and that's her backstory. And if you would like to respond to this, you may email me, Jeffmat, JEPHMAT @gmail.com. That's JEPHMAT, Jeffmat, Jeff with a JEPH. Just put blind survey in the subject line, and yeah, you can comment on this video, you can comment on this blog post, or you may send me an email. And I'd very much like to hear from you, and I very much appreciate you taking part in this. And I hope I do a good job with developing this character, which is what I very much want to do.